Hey everyone, welcome to another character guide. Brief introduction if you're new here, I'm Godric, and I've been playing Genshin Impact since its launch, and I'm here to give you guides that won't stress you out because we like to chill, as chilly as our character here, Kamisato Ayaka. Anyway, if you're new to the game, Ayaka is a character from Inazuma, and she's one of the renowned clans. So, if you haven't gotten to that part of the story yet, you'll see. And she bears a Cryo vision. So yeah, once again, this is Godric, and let's take a deeper look at Kamisato Ayaka. So like I said, Ayaka is a Cryo unit. Her weapon is a sword, and she's designed to be a DPS unit, and you could use her as an on-field DPS or a burst nuke DPS. And since this is her rerun, I can see that most of the skippers from her first run actually are considering her now, which you should, since she really packs solid damage and she has very high damage ceiling potential. Now let's take a look at Ayaka's kit and talents. So her kit leans on her being an excellent Cryo DPS, an applier, or burst nuke DPS. She has an extra talent similar to Mona's called the Kamisato Art Senho. So you turn into this icy speeding crawler, and when you end it, Ayaka's sword or attacks become infused with Cryo. Then her normal attacks can be comboed up to 5, a plunge attack, same as others, pretty standard. And then her charged attack is the one that's distinct, as it doesn't flick small mobs away. Instead, it just simply deals a large AoE, and it even works on Venti's Burst. However, Bennett's C6 Burst will infuse Pyro on Ayaka, so if your Bennett is C6, be careful about their pairing. The common playstyle for an on-field Ayaka is you dash, and then you do charge attacks because of its higher scaling, and in addition, simply dashing and popping out on mobs is a good Cryo application by itself. This is a good way, for example, for freeze teams to, permanently freeze your opponents. Her skill is a simple damage dealing Cryo area around her, so of course, it applies Cryo to the enemy's hit, and it also has a pretty high scaling. And then, her burst is a large spherical attack that moves forward to the direction of the nearest enemy, deals up to 20 ticks, and it has a high scaling too, so how and when you use it matters, as it just moves forward, so it hits everything in its path. Or, it may actually not hit anything, if you cast it incorrectly somewhere. It's the niche of her burst that you really want to time it correctly, especially say in the Abyss, you don't want to waste your DPS, right? And extra tip about Ayaka's burst is that it also hits mobs that are sucked by Venti's burst, and as it moves forward, it slightly pushes the enemies, so that's just an extra feature that you may notice. Ayaka's role is honestly pretty straightforward. Like I said earlier, she's designed to be a DPS character. It's up to you, or in your preferred team comp, if you make her an on-field DPS or a burst nuke DPS. And regardless, building her would be similar, but talent priority would of course differ. If you want to crown or level up to 9 her talents, players going for nuke burst DPS should prioritize her burst, of course, and then skill. And if it's purely for burst, of course, you can ignore the normal attacks. But personally, I don't think that she deserves that. Her normal attacks alone honestly deal significant damage. For players going for on-field DPS, since she's actually your on-field, I suggest going for her normal attacks first, and then burst and skill. You can also prioritize burst first and normals last, but you may find her underwhelming as an on-field DPS if you're, attacking with a level 1 talent. Also, being given the fact that her burst has a high energy cost, I personally double crown her skill and burst since she gives solid DPS, so no regrets. This time, let's look at Ayaka's weapons. Starting from the 3 stars, we can consider the Harbinger of Dawn for its crit damage substat, but make sure that you secure her health for the extra crit rate and the passive. And then for 4-star options, the free Inazuma craftable weapon is okay for her. You can time it right so you could get its passive up. It's also helpful since Ayaka's burst has a high cost. Next is the Blackcliff Longsword from the shop, also very helpful for its crit damage substat. The flute is okay, you can use it if you have no other option, but it can only be utilized if Ayaka's your on-field DPS due to its passive. Other swords I can't really recommend, for example, the Black Sword from the Battle Pass. It's good, definitely, it has good amount of crit rate and you can actually use it on her, but it would depend on your chosen artifact set, which we'll get to later. And of course, ER substat weapons, Favonius and Sacrificial, or even the Festering Desire, I won't recommend, better utilized by your supports. Next, on 5-star weapons. These of course are generally better because of their higher scaling and OP passives. First is the Primordial Jade Cutter, delicious crit rate stat stick, and something I also wouldn't recommend it's great overall, but I wouldn't recommend it on Ayaka. Next is the Aquila Favonia. Also a great weapon, but not for Ayaka since its substat isn't utilized on her. But if you have no other weapon, you can rely on it for its physical damage. It could be viable with superconduct teams where you can spam physical damage. But given her kit, how she's played, it's gonna be a niche or a meme thing. You really can't utilize it. Skyward Blade, a good weapon but can be utilized more by other characters. And then Summit Shaper, also a great weapon but you need to maintain your shield uptime. If you have no other weapon, make sure that you have a shielder with Ayaka. And then the Haran Gepaku Futsu, the latest weapon designed for Ayato. If you have this and you didn't get Ayato, I say it could be viable for an on-field Ayaka, albeit being pretty niche for Ayaka since you need to remember to only do normal attacks since that's the only one that this weapon buffs. You just need to use 2 skills from your other characters and then Ayaka's skill where you follow it up by a spam of normal attacks. I personally don't think that I could do that because I got used to doing charge attacks with Ayaka now. And aside from that, it also has a crit rate substat, so a little off for Ayaka. And then Miss Splitter Reforged, her and probably a lot more other characters' best weapon. This sword is so broken, I'm considering getting another copy for May Bennett. So the design, the passive, it's built for Ayaka. The passive text is quite long, but it simply forces you to do a string of attacks. So it has 3 stacks, but to get that, you need to satisfy these 3 conditions. First, normal attack with elemental damage, meaning you dash to infuse Ayaka with Cryo, right? And then second, you use your burst for another stack, so naturally, your energy goes below 100%, so you gain the weapon's 3 stacks, which would still apply even when her burst is already out there. So if you noticed, I'm not recommending any crit rate substat weapon, which I'll explain as we go to the artifact section. Ayaka has a single artifact set that I can recommend, and that's the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer set. Let's break down some more info about it and Cryo units as a whole. First off, Cryo Resonance gives you additional 15% crit rate on enemies affected by Cryo or are frozen. And next, the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer set gives you this bonus, so when you attack an enemy affected by Cryo, you get plus 20% crit rate, and get this, an additional 20% crit rate if that enemy is frozen. So honestly, hands down, this set, this element, these are broken, so you should definitely abuse it and make the most out of it. Taking all of them into consideration, you already have 55% crit rate. That's why I'm steering you clear from the crit rate weapon substats, as it would be quote-unquote useless, if you go above the normally appreciated crit rate, which is 70%, when if you could instead focus on crit damage for higher damage output. So naturally, your main stats should be like other DPSs, so attack percent Sands, Cryo damage Goblet, crit damage Circlet, and of course, substat priority would be on crit damage, attack percent, and if there are crit rate substats, that's okay if you want to feel secure about it. You can also welcome ER substats for easier or more comfortable burst uptime. But assuming that your Ayaka will have and should have a support battery, your ER is good at about 130 to 150. But then again, so I did a little test, just look at how it's going on here in the video. So if you think that your damage is still low, try checking your attack to crit damage ratio this time. Because the thing is, since we already have overflowing attack or crit damage, depending on whether you have an attack or crit damage weapon substat, you can use your Circlet with an attack percent piece if you have crit damage weapon substat. Or, you can use your crit damage Circlet if you have an attack weapon substat. But overall, it would also vary depending on your whole artifact substats, and if you have attack buffers, such as a Catalyst character with Thrilling Tales, or Bennett, except C6 of course, and of course Shenhe. So in extreme cases, for example, your total attack goes to about 3000, but your crit damage is up to 200 only. And then if you have about 2000 attack and 300 crit damage, both of these will yield the same damage output. Yeah, so it's a matter of balancing it out, like I said, with your whole artifacts, with your weapon and your Circlet this time. Or in my personal case, I have my attack on the lower scale and my crit damage on the high-end scale. So with that, I also use my Shenhe, and that's how I get my additional attack buff. You can also do this by pairing Ayaka with, like I said, a Thrilling Tales user or Bennett, except C6 of course, since that would ruin their synergy. And of course, you can also use a Noblesse user. And for lower AR players, you can make use of the Gladiator set for raw attack bonus, or the 2-piece Glad and another 2-piece set of either the Sojourner, Braveheart, or Gamblers. Just make sure that, you use the ones with better stats. So I'm currently using Ayaka C0, and she's broken as she is now. But let's look at her constellations if you want to try and further increase her potential. C1, get utilizing her on-field DPS potential, although it's personally underwhelming because it has a chance of reducing your skill cooldown by 0.3 seconds. And according to C1 Havers, it could total to about a 2-second reduction, so it's still decent but totally not needed. And C2 further enhances her burst by adding 2 more slashes, although it's only 20% of the original burst damage. And of course, C3 and C5 are additional 3 levels to her skill in burst. C4, I think, is the peak of her constellations, as it reduces the defense of the opponents by 30% if you hit them with your burst. So yeah, you have to time it correctly. And then C6, of course, further demands Ayaka to be on field, as you gain additional charge attack damage amounting to 298%. So that's quite a lot and broken. And like I said earlier, her charge attack really is quite distinct, so it's something that you should consider. So Ayaka generally needs a cryo battery, both for the cryo resonance and to help her with her burst regen. Now, some of her most famous comps, of course, is the Morgana team, where you want to completely freeze enemies and just spam your attacks. You can do this with Ayaka plus your Haido applier, so that's either Mona, Kokomi, Shengchu, or now Ayato. Her cryo battery in support, of course, it could either be Shenhe or Diona, or sometimes Rosaria or Kaya for the burst support. And then you want to include an Anemo character for their viridescent Venator shredding and or clumping of mobs. So the most renowned is Venti, but you can of course use either Kazuha or Sucrose. Also note here that including a healer is optional, since your goal ideally is to permanently freeze the mobs, right? So you essentially render them immobile, and hence you won't be receiving any damage. Now you can also do a mono cryo. This is something that I personally do with Ayaka plus Shenhe, Diona, and either Venti or Kazuha. Although it's quite an expensive team, and you can replace Shenhe with Rosaria or even Kaya. You might also notice that I'm not including Chongyan despite his decent burst and cryo infusion skill, because as we talked about earlier, Ayaka can infuse her weapon with cryo by herself. Now, you can also run Ayaka in a melt team. You can use your Xiangling as an off-field burst DPS, and of course another cryo and the flex, which is usually an Anemo. So now the question, should you pull for Ayaka? Her rerun banner is coming soon, and you have your Gems and Fate saved. Of course, if you like her character, go for her. If you don't, then don't. That should be your first deciding factor if you like the character. But if you're still trying to decide, then we can look at her pros and cons. So her pros include her being a cryo unit. Like we discussed earlier, it's something that you could easily use and abuse. You get tons of crit rate for free following the required conditions. And then, she can easily apply cryo via her dash, and it's very helpful for freeze comps, of course. She's also flexible in a way where she can be on-field or off-field DPS, and it will be left for you to decide. Her cons would be that her burst needs proper timing and precision. If you activate her burst in the wrong way, it would definitely be a waste of both time and energy, since it has an 80 cost, which is significantly high. And with that, she would always need a battery. So, more than team building, you also need to factor in one unit as her energy supplier. And I feel like this is something that's in between. I guess, as with any other characters, she's considerably easy to build. I keep saying it since you don't really need as much crit rate, but it would go down to if you have attack percent or crit damage rolls on your artifact pieces. But this is all given that you're using the Blizzard Strayer set. And for Constellations, like I said, she's a beast already at C0, and if you like to get some, if you have some spare fates or gems, I would suggest that you either go all the way to C2 or C4, or rather you just don't, since her C1, if you're trying to get only her C1, it's not as significant. On the other hand, if you're trying to decide whether to get C2 or her weapon, I would suggest that you go for her weapon instead. Despite this time, it's really cursed because of the unforged weapon. You get more value out of the Mistsplitter and with less amounts of fates, if you think about the guaranteed amount. So what do you think about Ayaka? Is she worth pulling? Is she worth spending your gems on? Comment down for a chance to win one Blessing of the Welkin Moon. Prize will be given via Coda Shop, and the winner will be announced next week. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something, and once again, this is Godric. Please like and share the video, the channel, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you on the next one.